Hey there, Uncharted Historian here, and welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we are traveling back to a time of gaslight and progress, of empire and invention, of incredible discovery, and even more incredible blind spots. We're settling into the plush, velvet-draped drawing rooms of Victorian England, where the evening's entertainment is something different. The centerpiece of the party isn't a new piano concerto or a visiting poet. It's a 3,000-year-old corpse, and you're invited to watch it get taken apart. It's a world so far from our own that were you actually there, you probably wouldn't survive the evening. Not because of a mummy's curse, but because you'd likely breathe in the wrong microbe from the crowded room and succumb to something wonderfully archaic. So, if you find a quiet sort of comfort in these historical drifts through the strange and forgotten corners of the past, perhaps consider leaving a like and subscribing. It's the most gentle way to let me know you're out there and to ensure we can keep these late-night journeys going. Feel free to post your city and the time where you are in the comments below. It's always nice to know where in the world you're all listening from. As always with our videos, the visuals aren't necessary to enjoy the story and are just here to provide extra context. Now, find your comfortable spot, let the world outside fade away, and allow the gentle hum of the room to be your only companion as we begin our journey. The day has been a familiar shade of London gray. A persistent drizzle has slicked the cobblestones outside your window, turning the world into a watercolor of charcoal and slate. The air that seeps in around the window sash is thick with the smell of damp wool, coal smoke, and the faint, ever-present tang of the Thames. It's the kind of evening that encourages an early retreat to a book and a warm fire. As you sit in your study, the gas lamp on your desk hisses a soft, steady song, casting a pool of honeyed light onto the dark wood. It's in this circle of warmth that the day's mail rests. Among the usual assortment of bills and social circulars, one envelope stands out. It's heavy, made of thick, creamy cardstock that feels impossibly luxurious to the touch. Your name is written across the front in a flourish of elegant, looping calligraphy, the ink a deep shade of indigo. There is no stamp, no postmark. This was delivered by hand. You slide a letter opener under the flap, breaking a seal of dark red wax. It's not a simple monogram, you notice, but a small, intricate stamping of a sphinx. A curious choice. As you unfold the card, a faint, not unpleasant scent of sandalwood and old paper wafts up to you. The invitation itself is a work of art. The edges are gilded, shimmering in the lamplight. In the corner, embossed in gold leaf, is a subtle sketch of a lotus flower and a scarab beetle. It's all very exotic, very fashionable. Then you read the words, engraved with the same impeccable script. Lord and Lady Harrington request the distinguished pleasure of your company for a private evening of antiquities, including the unwrapping of an authentic Theban mummy, on Thursday, the 15th of November, at 9:30 in the evening, number 27, Belgrave Square. You read the lines again, letting them sink in, and unwrapping. You've heard of these events, of course. They are the talk of the season, the absolute pinnacle of social invitations, far surpassing a simple ball or dinner. To host one means you have connections, wealth, and a certain intellectual daring. To be invited means you are someone of consequence. Securing a genuine sarcophagus from the sun-scorched sands of Egypt is a greater social coup than acquiring a new painting by Turner. It says you are a person of the world, a patron of science and history, or perhaps it just says you're very, very rich with a taste for the macabre. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for these events was genuine scientific curiosity or simply a form of sensationalist, high society theater. You look around your own comfortable yet modest study. Your own collection of curiosities seems rather tame by comparison. A few Roman coins, a fossilized ammonite, a piece of pottery you suspect is a clever forgery. But this is another level entirely. An actual mummy. A person who walked the earth when pharaohs ruled, who saw the Nile flood its banks, who was carefully, lovingly prepared for a journey into an eternity they could never have imagined would end like this. In a drafty London drawing room, under the gaze of a few dozen strangers in corsets and tailcoats. A faint shiver, not entirely from the cold, runs down your spine. It's ghoulish. There's no denying it. A desecration, some might whisper, and yet the pull of it is undeniable. The allure is a strange cocktail of intellectual pursuit and morbid spectacle. The newspapers are full of tales from Egypt, of grand discoveries in the Valley of the Kings, of a civilization so ancient it makes the Roman Empire look like a recent affair. To see a piece of that world, raw and unfiltered, feels like touching history itself. It's a thrill, a brush with the sublime, that thrilling blend of awe and terror that your generation is so fascinated by. You think of the host, Lord Harrington, a man known more for his inherited fortune than his intellect. This is his grand play for relevance, his attempt to rebrand himself as a man of science and letters. It's a bit transparent, really, but you have to admit, it's working. You're already considering what to wear. You place the invitation back on the desk, its gilded edges a stark contrast to the gloom outside. The city rumbles on, a beast of iron and steam, but for a moment, your mind is elsewhere. It's in a warm, dry tomb, filled with the scent of spices and resins, where silent priests performed their sacred rites thousands of years ago. What secrets are wrapped in those linen bandages? What story does this silent visitor from the past have to tell? There is only one way to find out. The evening of the 15th can't come soon enough. You are going to the party. You hold the embossed card in your hand, its weight a small, solid presence in the quiet of your study. You find yourself wondering, as the gas lamp hisses its gentle tune, how it came to this. How did the quiet sacred rest of the Egyptian dead become the premier form of entertainment for the London elite? This strange obsession didn't just spring from the damp London soil. Its roots stretch back half a century to a different land, a different kind of ambition, and a sun much hotter than any you've ever known. To understand the mummy in Lord Harrington's drawing room, you first have to understand the man who, in a way, sent it there, Napoleon Bonaparte. It all begins in 1798. While England is nervously watching his movements in Europe, Napoleon launches a truly audacious campaign, the invasion of Egypt. It was a bold military strategy aimed at disrupting Britain's trade routes to India. At least that was the official story. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's primary goal was colonial expansion, a strategic blow against his British rivals, or a genuine, if ego-driven, quest for knowledge in the spirit of the Enlightenment. Whatever his primary motive, he didn't just bring soldiers, cannons, and cavalry. He brought an army of a different sort. Tucked away on his fleet were 167 of France's finest minds: engineers, botanists, artists, architects, mathematicians, and linguists. They were called the savants, the learned ones, and their mission was just as important as taking Cairo. Imagine them, these men of science and art, stepping off their ships into the blinding light and overwhelming heat of Alexandria. They were leaving the familiar world of Parisian salons and laboratories for a landscape that to them was little more than a legend. They were tasked with documenting everything. They surveyed the Nile, sketched the flora and fauna, studied the local customs, and, most importantly, they turned their astonished eyes to the ruins of a civilization that dwarfed their own. For the first time, European science was systematically confronting the sheer scale of Karnak, the haunting gaze of the Sphinx, the mathematical perfection of the pyramids. These savants worked under impossible conditions. They endured dysentery, trachoma, a dreadful eye infection that blinded many, and the constant threat of skirmishes with Ottoman and Mamluk forces. There's a certain dark humor in imagining a dedicated artist, squinting in the desert sun, trying to perfectly render the curve of a temple colonnade while the sound of musket fire echoes in the distance. Nothing like the threat of imminent danger to focus the creative mind, I suppose. They persevered, driven by a thirst for discovery. The result of their colossal effort was a publication that would change the world's imagination forever, the Description de l'Egypte. This wasn't just a book. It was a monument in its own right. Published over 2 decades in 23 massive volumes, it was the most ambitious and comprehensive record of a foreign land ever attempted. The engravings were stunningly detailed, capturing the grandeur of the temples and the intricate beauty of the hieroglyphs that covered every surface. It was the ultimate coffee table book of its day, except it was so enormous it would have shattered the coffee table, the floorboards, and probably the owner's bank account. For the first time, the educated public of Europe could see ancient Egypt, not just read about it in the fragmented accounts of classical authors like Herodotus. The description was a sensation. It landed in the libraries and drawing rooms of the wealthy, and it ignited a fire. Suddenly, everything Egyptian was the height of fashion. Furniture began to sprout sphinx heads. Jewelry was designed with scarab motifs, and the mysterious hieroglyphs became a decorative craze. And amidst this flurry of scholarship and military action, a French soldier, busy rebuilding a fort near the town of Rashid, which the Europeans called Rosetta, unearthed a broken slab of dark stone. It wasn't much to look at, but it was inscribed with 3 different scripts: the familiar ancient Greek, a later Egyptian script called Demotic, and the enigmatic picture-like hieroglyphs. This, of course, was the Rosetta Stone. It was the key, the code book, the one thing that could turn all those beautiful, mysterious symbols from mere decoration into a readable language, a direct voice from the past. But history has a funny way of playing out. The French found the stone, but after their defeat in 1801, the British took it as a spoil of war. It ended up in the British Museum, a national treasure and a point of immense pride. This kicked off an intense rivalry between Britain and France. It became the 19th century equivalent of the space race, but with more sand and fewer rockets. Who could decipher the stone first? Who could claim the legacy of the pharaohs as their own intellectual prize? This national competition fanned the flames of public fascination. Egypt wasn't just old. It was a puzzle to be solved, a treasure to be claimed. And this new, fervent obsession, this Egyptomania, needed to be fed. A book of drawings, no matter how beautiful, was no longer enough. People wanted the real thing. They wanted artifacts they could touch, display, and own. And so began the great, frantic scramble for the antiquities of the Nile, a scramble that would soon lead to the drawing room where your invitation now lies. So, the fuse was lit. The drawing rooms and studies of London and Paris were buzzing with this new, fervent Egyptomania, thanks to Napoleon's savants and their magnificent publications. But this created a practical problem. It's one thing to admire a detailed engraving of a pharaoh's tomb, but it's another thing entirely to own a piece of it. You couldn't exactly pop down to the corner shop and pick up a canopic jar. Not yet, anyway. The demand for authentic antiquities was exploding, and where there is demand, a supply chain will inevitably form. In this case, the supply chain was forged by a new and peculiar breed of man: the adventurer, the consul, the collector, and, let's be honest, the remarkably successful tomb raider. This is where figures who were larger than life, almost mythical in their own time, stride onto the stage. And none were larger than the man from Padua, Giovanni Battista Belzoni. Before he was the most famous excavator in Egypt, Belzoni was, of all things, a circus strongman. Standing a formidable 6'6", he traveled Europe performing feats of strength, billed as the Patagonian Samson. It turns out that the skill set of a circus strongman, namely, being able to move incredibly heavy objects and possessing a certain showman's flair, was surprisingly transferable to the burgeoning field of 19th century archaeology. He arrived in Egypt originally hoping to sell a hydraulic engine to its ruler, Muhammad Ali Pasha. When that venture failed, he found himself broke, but in the right place at the right time. He was hired by the British Consul General, Henry Salt, to acquire antiquities for him. And Belzoni attacked this new career with the same gusto he once applied to lifting platforms of men on stage. His methods were direct. Today, an archaeologist approaches a site with brushes, dental picks, and painstaking patience. Belzoni approached a site with a battering ram. He speaks in his own journals of forcing his way into tombs that had been sealed for millennia, of crawling on his stomach through passages so tight they scraped his skin, the air thick with the dust of ages. His most vivid, and perhaps most telling account, describes his experience inside a newly opened tomb. He writes of searching for a place to rest in the darkness, only to find that every surface was covered in mummies. When he sat down, he heard a sickening crunch as the body beneath him collapsed into dust and bone. He describes the air being so thick with the fine powder of pulverized remains that it filled his nose, his mouth, his eyes, making it impossible to breathe without inhaling the ancient dead. It's a horrifying image, but it was the price of doing business. And business was good. Belzoni was relentlessly effective. He was the one who, through sheer engineering brute force, managed to move the 7-ton granite head of Rameses II, the younger Memnon, from its resting place at Thebes and haul it to the Nile so it could be shipped to the British Museum, where it remains a star attraction today. He was the first person in modern times to enter the Great Pyramid of Khafra at Giza, and he discovered the breathtakingly beautiful tomb of Pharaoh Seti I in the Valley of the Kings, its walls still vibrant with color. Of course, he wasn't alone. This was a fiercely competitive game. His chief rival was Bernardino Drovetti, the French consul general, who was just as determined to secure treasures for France as Belzoni and Salt were for Britain. They were essentially running competing international franchises in the tomb raiding business, with national pride as a performance bonus. Spies would track their movements. They would bribe local officials to get exclusive digging rights, and sometimes they'd even try to excavate the same site at the same time. It was a chaotic, unregulated gold rush, but the gold was history itself. Historians and archaeologists still debate how to label these men. Were they intrepid explorers, saving priceless antiquities from the certainty of being neglected, broken up for building materials by locals, or destroyed by less careful plunderers? Or were they simply colonial agents and sophisticated thieves, operating with a thin veneer of scientific justification while they stripped a nation of its heritage? The truth, as it often is, probably lies somewhere in the murky middle. Belzoni, for his part, took detailed notes and made beautiful watercolor drawings of the tombs he explored. He was certainly more than a mere vandal, but his primary motivation was recovery, not preservation. Get the treasure out, get it on a boat, and get it back to London. And so, a steady stream of artifacts began to flow north along the Nile and across the Mediterranean. Obelisks, statues, sarcophagi, papyrus scrolls, and of course, mummies, hundreds and hundreds of them. They arrived in the ports of Liverpool and London, packed in crates, their final journey far from the spiritual voyage their embalmers had intended. They were now commodities, destined for the grand museums being established across Europe, or for the private collections of wealthy aristocrats, industrialists, and doctors. It was this deluge of the dead, unearthed by men like Belzoni, that made an event like the one on your invitation not just possible, but fashionable. The supply was now there, and you're about to see, in the most direct way imaginable, what became of it. The great tide of history, pushed by men like Belzoni, washed a strange cargo onto European shores. The finest sarcophagi went to museums, the most beautiful statues to the estates of dukes. But these were the exceptions. The reality is that the sheer number of mummies unearthed and shipped out of Egypt was staggering. We're not talking about dozens or hundreds, but thousands upon thousands. An entire civilization's dead, disinterred, and exported. So what do you do with such a vast and macabre surplus? When an object, even a human body, becomes this plentiful, it ceases to be a sacred relic and becomes something else entirely, a raw material. And the Victorians, with their boundless industrial ingenuity, found no shortage of uses for it. Long before your invitation was ever printed, a substance known as mumia was a staple in any respectable apothecary's shop. This was medicine, made from ground-up Egyptian mummies. The practice dates back centuries, born from a simple, centuries-old misunderstanding. The dark, resinous bitumen used in the embalming process looked very similar to a natural asphalt also called mumia, which was believed to have healing properties. Over time, people conflated the two, and the belief arose that the preserved body itself, imbued with ancient spices and longevity, held the curative power. So, for hundreds of years, if you had a headache, a bruise, an epileptic fit, or even a case of the plague, your doctor might genuinely prescribe a dose of powdered pharaoh. It was sold openly, a testament to how the line between medicine and magic can be very blurry indeed. But if being ground into a dubious medicine wasn't your mummy's fate, perhaps it could find a second life in the arts. Have you ever admired the rich, warm, translucent brown tones in a painting by a pre-Raphaelite master? If so, you may have been looking at a color called mummy brown. And yes, it is exactly what it sounds like. The pigment was made by taking whole Egyptian mummies, human and, for some reason, feline ones were also popular, grinding them into a fine powder, and then mixing that powder with white pitch and myrrh. Artists loved it. It created a uniquely luminous brown that was difficult to replicate. This went on for decades, a quiet, ghoulish secret of the art world, until the truth began to get out. There's a wonderful and reportedly true story about the artist Edward Burne-Jones. He was a great fan of the pigment until a fellow artist casually informed him of its ingredients at a dinner party. Burne-Jones was so horrified that he immediately left the table, rushed to his studio, seized his last tube of mummy brown, and gave it a proper, formal burial in his back garden. One hopes he said a few words. It's the very least you can do for your art supplies when you discover they used to be a person. Medicine and paint accounted for a good number of the dead, but it took industrial-scale thinking to deal with the true bulk of the imports. It seems the ancient Egyptians' elaborate journey to the afterlife had an unexpected final destination: a paint tube, a medicine bottle, or a potato field in Kent. That's right, fertilizer. In the latter half of the 19th century, countless mummified remains, both human and animal, especially cats, from sacred burial sites numbering in the hundreds of thousands, were shipped to Britain and Germany by the ton. They were put into industrial grinders and pulverized to be sold as agricultural fertilizer. It was cheap, it was effective, and it was a startlingly unsentimental end for millions. And the uses don't stop there. Historians still debate the scale of some of these practices, particularly the grimly fascinating claim that mummies were used as locomotive fuel in Egypt itself. Wood and coal were scarce, and as Mark Twain noted in his travelogue, The Innocents Abroad, the country seemed to have an endless supply of combustible engineers. Whether it was a widespread reality or a morbid exaggeration that captured the spirit of the age, the fact that it was believable says everything. Across the Atlantic, an American paper magnate in the 1860s even imported mummy linen wrappings to be manufactured into brown butcher's paper. The venture was reportedly cut short by fears of a cholera outbreak among his mill workers. Thinking about all this, the medicine, the paint, the fuel, the fertilizer, suddenly casts Lord Harrington's party in a new light. In a world where a mummy could be your medicine or the paint on your wall, taking one apart for the entertainment of your friends seems almost respectful by comparison. Almost. At least the mummy at this party will be the star of the show. It will be the center of attention, an object of scientific inquiry and social fascination, not just anonymous dust in a bottle or fuel for a fire. It is, in its own strange way, one of the lucky ones. And now you find yourself getting ready. The night of the party has arrived, and it's time to step out into the London fog and make your way to Belgrave Square. The night has finally come. You've dressed with care, choosing somber but fashionable evening attire appropriate for an event that hovers somewhere between a scientific demonstration and a séance. A hansom cab carries you through the familiar labyrinth of London streets. The fog is so thick tonight you feel you could lean against it, a murky, yellow-gray blanket that muffles the sounds of the city and turns the gas lamps into fuzzy, haloed orbs of light. The rhythmic clopping of the horse's hooves on the whetstone is a steady, hypnotic beat, a drum roll leading you towards your strange destination. You pull up to number 27 Belgrave Square. The house, a grand white stuccoed mansion, looms out of the mist, every window ablaze with light. Carriages are lined up along the curb, and silhouetted figures hurry from the damp chill into the welcoming glow of the entrance. This is the heart of aristocratic London, a world of immense wealth and power. And tonight, it's also a gateway to the ancient past. A footman in crisp livery opens your cab door, and you step out, pulling your coat tight against the cold for one last moment before ascending the grand stone steps. The moment you cross the threshold, the world changes. The cold, quiet, damp fog of the street is instantly replaced by a wall of warmth, light, and noise. The air inside is heavy and thick, a rich concoction of beeswax floor polish. The scent of hundreds of hothouse flowers, and the sweet, cloying smell of expensive French perfume. The light from a dozen gas chandeliers glitters on gilded mirrors and crystal glasses, casting a brilliant, if slightly harsh, glow over everything. It's almost overwhelmingly bright after the gloom outside, and the room is packed. A sea of black tailcoats and vibrantly colored silk and velvet gowns surges around you. The sound is a constant, humming roar of conversation and laughter. You hand your hat and coat to a servant and take a moment to adjust to the scene. Ladies fan themselves languidly, their bustled dresses taking up an impressive amount of floor space. Gentlemen stand in tight knots, sipping sherry and pontificating on politics or the latest stock prices. The atmosphere is surprisingly festive, buzzing with an energy that is more cocktail party than funeral. Social historians still debate the precise etiquette for such an unusual event. Was it considered poor taste to seem too morbidly eager, or was an air of intense, scientific fascination the expected response? You observe the crowd, trying to find your footing in this strange social current. The air is incredibly close. The combination of so many bodies, the fumes from the gasoliers, and the lack of any real ventilation makes the room feel stuffy. It's no wonder fainting was such a common occurrence at these gatherings. You make a mental note to stay near a large potted palm, just in case a strategic swoon becomes necessary. It's always good to have a soft landing. But underneath the familiar smells of a society party, you detect something else. A faint, dry, dusty scent. It carries notes of spice, cinnamon perhaps, and something else, something resinous and ancient. It's the smell of the guest of honor. You accept a glass of champagne from a passing tray, the cool bubbles a welcome contrast to the warmth of the room. And then your eyes, like those of everyone else, are drawn to the focal point of all this activity. There, in the center of the largest drawing room, stands a long trestle table, draped in a simple white linen sheet. Upon it rests a dark, oblong shape. It's a sarcophagus, though not one of the grand, golden affairs you've seen in engravings. This one is made of wood, its surface covered in painted figures and hieroglyphs, now faded and chipped by the passage of 3,000 years. It is perfectly still, an island of profound silence in this ocean of noise. It is, without a doubt, the oldest and quietest guest in attendance. A hush of anticipation seems to ripple through the crowd, a subtle shift in the tone of the conversations. The preliminary social rituals are coming to an end. People are beginning to drift towards the center of the room, their curiosity finally overwhelming their polite chatter. You find yourself moving with them, drawn by that same invisible string. You secure a position with a good view, your champagne flute forgotten in your hand. The air crackles with expectation. Everyone is waiting, waiting for the host, waiting for the performance to begin, waiting to see what secrets lie inside that silent painted box. The murmur of the crowd softens to an expectant hush. A space has been cleared around the sarcophagus, and into this space steps your host, Lord Harrington. He is a portly man in his 50s, his face flushed with excitement and sherry. He positively beams at his audience, tapping a crystal glass with a small silver knife for complete silence. "My dear friends," he begins, his voice resonating with practiced importance. "Welcome. We stand tonight upon a bridge between worlds, a bridge between our modern age of steam and steel and a time of myth, magic, and pharaohs." He gestures dramatically towards the wooden coffin. "Thanks to the diligent efforts of our agents in Cairo, we have the immense privilege of being the first eyes to gaze upon this individual in 3 millennia. We do this not for cheap thrills, but in the noble pursuit of science, of history, of advancing human knowledge. You get the distinct impression he is also quite interested in advancing his social standing, but you have to admit, he has the room captivated. As he speaks, you reflect that while Lord Harrington is tonight's master of ceremonies, he is merely an imitator. He's following a script written by the true king of this strange domain, the man who turned mummy unwrapping into an art form, Thomas Joseph Pettigrew. To understand this moment, you have to understand him. Pettigrew was not a lord or a dilettante. He was one of London's most respected surgeons and anatomists. This professional standing was his secret weapon. It lent an unassailable air of scientific legitimacy to what might otherwise have been seen as simple graveyard desecration. He was one of the few men in London who could lecture students on anatomy in the afternoon and dissect a 3,000-year-old nobleman in the evening. His passion for ancient Egypt was all-consuming, earning him the nickname Mummy Pettigrew. He was a founding member of the British Archaeological Association and published one of the first truly scholarly books on the subject, his History of Egyptian Mummies. He wasn't just a showman. He was a genuine, if obsessive, scholar. His home on the fashionable Savile Row became a veritable private museum, crammed with artifacts, papyri, and sarcophagi. It was said he even tried to mummify a crocodile in his garden to better reverse engineer the ancient embalming techniques. One can only imagine his neighbors had a few questions about the strange smells wafting over the fence. Pettigrew perfected the public unrolling. He held them in the packed lecture theaters of hospitals and institutes, and for a higher price, in the private drawing rooms of the aristocracy. He had a gift for performance. He knew how to build suspense, how to lecture with authority, and how to reveal each new layer with a flourish. He would carefully describe the resins used, the quality of the linen, the placement of the limbs, all while the audience leaned forward in their seats, a mixture of scholars, society ladies, and morbid thrill-seekers hanging on his every word. He transformed a potentially grotesque act into a respectable, intellectual, and thrillingly popular event. And so, his legacy is complicated. Historians still debate it fiercely. Was he a pioneering Egyptologist who did more than anyone to popularize the subject? A man who salvaged knowledge from remains that might otherwise have been ground into fertilizer? Or was he the ultimate destructive showman? A man who, in the name of science, desecrated hundreds of irreplaceable historical artifacts for the fleeting amusement of a crowd. He was, most likely, both at once. Back in Lord Harrington's drawing room, you can see Pettigrew's influence everywhere. Your host has concluded his lofty preamble and now turns to a small table laid out beside the mummy. On it, gleaming under the gaslight, is a set of tools that look suspiciously like a surgeon's kit. Fine scalpels, silver forceps, sharp shears, and probes. Lord Harrington picks up a pair of shears, the metallic snip-snip, as he tests them, the only sound in the silent room. He is playing the part of Pettigrew, the surgeon scholar, about to make his first incision, not into a living patient, but into time itself. The performance, a well-rehearsed echo of dozens that have come before, is about to begin. Lord Harrington places his now empty glass on a tray and gestures to two of his staff. The footmen, looking far more nervous than they did when they were serving champagne, step forward to the head and foot of the sarcophagus. You suspect lifting the lid of a 3,000-year-old coffin was not in their original job description. With a shared glance, they heave. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, With a low groan of ancient dry wood, the painted lid begins to shift. A collective, soft gasp ripples through the room. As the lid is lifted clear and carefully placed on the floor, the mummy is revealed. It lies cocooned in its wrappings, a still, human-shaped form against the clean white linen of the table. The outer shrouds are a dark mottled brown, stained with the resins and oils that were poured over them in a workshop in Thebes so long ago. A beautifully painted funerary mask, made of a kind of ancient papier-mâché called cartonnage, covers the head and shoulders. The gilded face stares up at the glittering gas chandelier with a look of serene indifference. And then there is the smell. The faint, dusty scent you noticed on arrival is now a presence in the room. It's not the smell of decay you might expect. It's something else entirely. It's a dry, spicy, aromatic scent of myrrh and cinnamon, of natron salt, of cedar oil, and of linen that has been dry for longer than any kingdom in Europe has existed. It's a powerful, ancient perfume that immediately bulldozes the scent of Lady Ainsworth's violets. History, it seems, has its own cologne. Harrington, now fully in his element as the surgeon scholar, picks up a pair of long-bladed shears. "The outer bindings," he announces, his voice a little too loud in the silent room, "are often the coarsest. We may find several shrouds before we reach the fine linen bandages themselves. The entire process could involve hundreds of yards of cloth." He leans over the mummy's chest, positioning the shears. For a heartbeat, the tableau is frozen. The eager host, the silent mummy, the breathless crowd. Then, he makes the first cut. The sound is shockingly loud in the quiet. It's not the soft snip you'd expect, but a dry, brittle tearing sound, like ripping old parchment. A puff of fine, brown dust explodes from the incision, catching the light in a momentary, glittering cloud. You find yourself holding your breath, making a mental note to breathe shallowly. You've probably inhaled enough of London's industrial soot for one day without adding a desiccated ancient Egyptian to the menu. The process begins in earnest. Harrington makes several long cuts, and the footmen, acting as his surgical assistants, begin to peel back the first thick layer of shroud. It's stiff and brittle, hardened by the bitumen that was poured over it. In some places, it's so rock hard that Harrington has to exchange his shears for a small, sharp chisel, tapping at it carefully with a wooden mallet. It flakes away in dark, resinous chunks. As you watch him work, a thought drifts into your mind. You are witnessing an act of discovery, but also an act of irreversible destruction. Conservators of the future would surely be horrified. They would argue that the true history lies not just in the body, but in the intricate context of its wrappings, the specific folds, the knots, the placement of every single strip. Knowledge that, once unraveled, is lost forever. But here, in this moment, the only thought is of moving forward, of getting to the center. Layer after layer comes away. The bandages beneath the outer shrouds are of a finer quality, a lighter yellow-brown. Some strips have markings on them, little squiggles of ink. Harrington pauses, pointing with his probe. "Hieratic script," he declares. Likely a notation from the embalmer's workshop, or perhaps a line from the Book of the Dead, to guide the soul on its journey. He can't read it, of course. Very few people in the world can. But it sounds impressive. As the servants carefully unroll the long strips of linen, piling them on the floor, the shape beneath becomes more defined. The swell of the chest, the line of the thighs, the curve of the skull beneath the cartonnage mask. The room is utterly silent now, save for Harrington's occasional commentary and the relentless, dry ripping of the bandages. It's methodical, hypnotic. The pile of discarded linen on the floor grows larger and larger. You are no longer at a party. You are in a strange operating theater, and the patient has been waiting a very, very long time for this procedure. The anticipation is a physical thing, a tightness in your chest. The human form is emerging from its ancient cocoon, and soon, you feel, you will see something remarkable. The methodical tearing of linen continues, a dry, rhythmic sound that has become the heartbeat of the room. A footman peels away a thick swathe of bandages from the mummy's torso, and as the cloth falls away, something small and dark tumbles out, landing on the white sheet with a soft but distinct clink. The work stops instantly. He holds it aloft for all to see. It's a beetle, carved from a dark green stone, its surface smooth and polished, a scarab. A murmur of pure delight ripples through the audience. Suddenly, the dusty, methodical process has a flash of a treasure hunt. It's infinitely more exciting than finding the sixpence in a Christmas pudding. Ah, Harrington booms, the heart scarab. He places it carefully on a small silver tray. According to ancient belief, the heart was the seat of intelligence and memory. After death, it would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth. If the heart was heavy with sin, it would be devoured by a monster. This amulet was placed over the heart, enchanted with a spell from the Book of the Dead to prevent the heart from speaking out against its owner at the moment of judgment. He pauses for effect. A kind of spiritual insurance, you see. This first discovery opens the floodgates. As more layers are peeled back, a trove of tiny treasures is revealed, like charms baked into the layers of a cake. A small, pillar-like object of brilliant blue ceramic, faience, Harrington calls it, is found near the neck. The Jed pillar, he announces, holding it up, a symbol of the backbone of the god Osiris. It represents stability and endurance in the afterlife. Next, tucked into the wrappings around an arm, is a beautiful amulet in the shape of an eye, inlaid with dark stone. The Eye of Horus, a potent symbol of protection and healing. Each discovery is met with fresh oohs and ahs from the mesmerized guests. Lord Harrington identifies each one with booming confidence. You're not entirely sure if he's drawing from deep scholarly knowledge or a popular new book he skimmed in his study an hour ago. But he is certainly selling it well. He declares the amulets to be of the finest quality, lapis lazuli, carnelian, and even a small ankh of solid gold, praising the wealth and status of the mummy. He makes a point of noting that these are not the cheap faience imitations one might find on a commoner. The silver tray, with its growing collection of sacred jewels, is passed carefully among the guests in the front rows. When it reaches you, you lean in for a closer look. The Jed pillar is cool to the touch, its blue glaze still vibrant after 30 centuries. You look at these silent, beautiful objects, made with such skill and faith. Egyptologists of your time still debate the precise nature of their power. Was the object itself magical, a battery of divine energy? Or was it merely a physical anchor for the spoken spells and incantations, useless without the sacred words that were now lost to time? You resist the urge to pocket the small blue pillar. It's meant to grant stability, and you imagine it would be a marvelous conversation starter at future dinners. But you value Lord Harrington's good opinion, and a future invitation far more. You pass the tray along, your mind buzzing. These weren't just decorations. To the person lying on the table, these were essential tools. a spiritual toolkit for navigating the perilous landscape of the underworld. Each one was a prayer, a shield, a promise of eternity. The discovery of the amulets seems to finish. The last of the small treasures has been retrieved, catalogued aloud by your host, and admired by the crowd. The final, innermost layers of linen, much finer and softer than the outer ones, are now being unwrapped. They are stained dark from direct contact with the balms and resins that coat the skin. The vague human shape is gone, replaced by the stark, unmistakable reality of the body itself. The cartonnage mask is lifted away. The room falls into its deepest silence yet. The party is over. The autopsy is about to begin. The last of the linen wrappings are cut away and fall to the floor, joining the growing pile of their brethren. The cartonnage mask and chest plate have been set aside. Under the unrelenting glare of the gasliers, the mummy is finally, fully revealed. The room, if it's possible, becomes even quieter. This is the moment all the anticipation has led to. You are looking at a human being who has not been seen by human eyes since the reign of Rameses the Great. The body is surprisingly intact, though shrunken. The skin is a dark, leathery brown, pulled taut against the bone like old parchment. The process of desiccation has preserved the form perfectly. The hands are crossed over the chest, the fingers long and elegant, the nails surprisingly pristine, and you notice tipped with gold leaf. It's all remarkably preserved. You've seen living guests at other London parties who look significantly worse for wear. Lord Harrington exchanges his shears for a delicate silver probe, his demeanor shifting from excited treasure hunter to sober, serious man of science. He is now the anatomist, and this is his lecture theater. "Ladies and gentlemen," he begins, his voice low and professional, "let us see what this remarkable individual can tell us." He gently prizes open the jaw. Observe the teeth. They are all present, with only moderate wear to the molars. This suggests an individual who had passed youth but had not yet reached old age. I would estimate an age of death between 30 and 35 years. The crowd nods, absorbing this first fact. He then moves the probe to the hands. Note the fineness of the bones, the lack of any calluses or signs of heavy labor. The skin, though dry, is smooth. This, combined with the quality of the embalming and the pure gold on the fingernails, confirms our suspicion. This was not a worker of the fields. This was a person of immense status, a noble, or perhaps, given the number of sacred amulets, a high priest. He constructs the story piece by piece, weaving a biography from these scant physical clues. This is the great performance of the night. Modern paleopathologists, with their X-rays, CT scanners, and DNA analysis, often completely overturn the confident conclusions of these 19th century examinations. The central debate for historians is how much of this Victorian analysis was genuine, if limited science, and how much was pure theatrical invention, designed to spin a satisfying yarn for the audience. Watching Lord Harrington, you suspect it's a healthy mix of both. He points the probe to the skull, now fully visible. The brow is not prominent, the chin delicate. The pelvic girdle, though not fully exposed, appears narrow. I can confidently state that we are in the presence of a man. Another murmur goes through the crowd, another piece of the puzzle slotted into place. But the ultimate question remains: how did he die? Harrington meticulously examines the torso and limbs. I find no evidence of physical trauma, he announces. No broken bones, no spear wounds, no marks of violence whatsoever. We can surmise, therefore, that he was not a soldier cut down in battle. The cause of death was likely an illness. A sudden fever, perhaps, or a pestilence for which their finest physicians had no remedy. It's a very neat and tidy diagnosis, and certainly more palatable for the ladies present than, say, death by crocodile attack, which was a genuine risk in ancient Egypt. Then, for his grand finale, Lord Harrington dips into the most fashionable pseudoscience of the day, phrenology. He runs his fingers gently over the dry, bald scalp of the mummy. Fascinating, he mutters, as if to himself, before addressing the room. Observe the cranial structure. There is a very well-developed protuberance here in the region of veneration. This confirms our theory that this man was of a priestly class, disposed to piety and worship. He moves his fingers slightly. And here, the organ of sublimity is also most prominent, indicating a soul with a keen appreciation for grandeur and beauty. You're not entirely convinced that a lump on a skull can prove a man's vocation, but you see ladies and gentlemen all around you nodding sagely, as if this is the most logical deduction in the world. You decide to nod along too. It seems the polite thing to do. The story is now complete. Lord Harrington steps back from the table, placing his silver probe down with a quiet, final click. He gives a small, self-satisfied bow. For a moment, the room is trapped in an awkward silence, suspended between the ancient world and the modern one. Then, someone begins to clap. It's a tentative, scattered sound at first, which then builds into a wave of polite applause. It's an odd moment. Applauding the dissection of a corpse feels distinctly ghoulish, but not applauding your host's elaborate and expensive performance seems unforgivably rude. In the end, as it always does, British politeness wins out. The spell of silent concentration is broken. The room exhales, and the hum of conversation returns, louder this time, fizzing with released tension. You take the opportunity to look around at the faces of your fellow guests, and you see a perfect gallery of Victorian reactions. Near the front, a group of gentlemen with impressive sideburns have crowded closer to the table, their expressions alight with intellectual fervor. They nod approvingly, discussing the finer points of Harrington's phrenological analysis and debating the precise techniques of bitumen versus natron embalming. For them, this is progress, a triumph of rational inquiry. One of them is even taking notes in a small leather-bound book, as if preparing for an examination. But just a few feet away, you witness an entirely different scene. A young woman, her face the color of milk, dabs at her temples with a lace handkerchief. Another lady leans heavily on her husband's arm, her chest rising and falling dramatically as her fan beats the stuffy air in a frantic rhythm. Just as you're watching, her eyes roll back in her head and she gracefully crumples towards the floor. It's the swoon you were half expecting. The moment happens so quickly and is handled with such practiced efficiency that it's almost part of the show. Her husband catches her. A footman rushes in with a vial of smelling salts, and she is gently escorted from the room. Her husband wears an expression that is both concerned and vaguely proud. A wife who faints in public is, in a strange way, a testament to her exquisite sensitivity and his own good taste in choosing such a delicate creature. Social historians still debate this phenomenon. Were these fainting spells a genuine physiological reaction to the tight corsetry and oxygen-starved rooms? Or were they a learned, theatrical performance of ideal feminine delicacy? You realize you are witnessing the two faces of the Victorian soul, side by side. The clinical, scientific fascination with the material world, and the Gothic, romantic horror of the supernatural and the grotesque. And for many in the room, the two feelings are not contradictory. They are intertwined in that peculiar, powerful emotion your generation calls the sublime. It's the thrill of standing on a cliff edge, the awe of watching a thunderstorm. It is terror and beauty wrapped up in one overwhelming package. This mummy, this dead thing, this scientific specimen, this visitor from a terrifyingly vast expanse of time, is the perfect object of the sublime. It satisfies the desire for knowledge and the craving for a good old-fashioned shudder. The chatter around you swells. A man next to you is excitedly telling his companion about mummy wheat. He claims a friend of his was given 3 grains of wheat found in the hand of a priestess's mummy, and when he planted them, they miraculously grew. You don't have the heart to tell him the miracle grain was most likely sourced from a farm in Hampshire and sold to credulous tourists in Cairo. Elsewhere, the gossip is more direct. "Did you see the gilding on the nails?" A woman whispers behind her fan. "My dear, I thought I would simply die when he took the mask off. So, exposed. The mummy on the table is no longer a person or a specimen. It has completed its final transformation of the evening. It is now a conversation piece. The scientific demonstration is over, and the party is beginning again. But you have a strange feeling that the most bizarre part of the night is yet to come." As the initial shock of the unveiling recedes, the party reassembles itself. Servants begin to circulate once more, this time with trays of port wine, cakes, and other refreshments. The atmosphere becomes lighter, almost giddy with the release of tension. The mummy, now exposed and demystified, lies on its table under the chandeliers. It has transitioned from an object of awe and terror into the evening's primary topic of gossip and intellectual preening. You overhear snippets of conversation, guests trying to outdo one another with their casual displays of knowledge or sensitivity. But Lord Harrington, ever the consummate showman, is not quite finished. He has one last flourish for his audience. He taps his glass one final time, a broad, triumphant smile on his face. "My friends," he announces, "I thank you for sharing this momentous occasion with me. I hope it has been as educational as it has been thrilling. And so that you may always remember this night, this bridge we have crossed into the world of the ancients, I invite you to take a small memento." With that, he picks up his shears again, but this time he turns not to the body, but to the great tangled pile of discarded linen bandages on the floor. He begins to snip the ancient cloth into neat palm-sized squares. A footman stands by with a large silver platter, and as Harrington cuts, he places the swatches onto the tray. This certainly beats the small bag of sugared almonds one usually gets at a society function. The footman begins to circulate with the tray of linen scraps as if he were serving hors d'oeuvres, and the guests are delighted. They descend upon the tray with an enthusiasm that suggests they've been starved of 3,000-year-old textiles their whole lives. Ladies in silk gowns carefully take a square and tuck it into their delicate purses. Gentlemen select a piece and fold it neatly into their waistcoat pockets, a tangible piece of history to be shown off at the club the next day. You watch, fascinated and slightly appalled, as this final act of disassembly takes place. You overhear a woman whisper excitedly to her friend, "I shall have my jeweler place it in a locket. So much more interesting than a lock of hair, don't you think?" It's a perfect, macabre encapsulation of the era's sentimentality. While this distribution of linen was a common practice, the taking of more substantial souvenirs was a murkier affair. Historians still debate the extent of it. Was it a rare request from only the most ghoulish collector, or a more widespread, unspoken perk of attending these private events? You watch a particularly important-looking duke have a quiet word with Lord Harrington. The host smiles, nods, and discreetly turns back to the table. With a pair of forceps, he loosens one of the mummy's teeth and drops it into the Duke's waiting hand. The transaction is seamless, a quiet exchange of influence for a piece of a person. Finally, the tray reaches you. A dozen or so brown, brittle-looking squares of ancient cloth lie on the polished silver. The footman proffers it with a perfectly blank expression. For a moment, you hesitate. This is a burial shroud. Taking it feels like the ultimate violation. But then, you are a creature of your time. This is a status symbol, a souvenir of an unforgettable night, proof that you were in the inner circle. To refuse would almost be an insult. You reach out and take a piece. It feels dry and surprisingly coarse in your hand, and it still carries that faint, spicy scent of the tomb. You fold it carefully and slip it into your own pocket, feeling a strange and unsettling mixture of social triumph and profound sacrilege. You'll have to remember not to send this particular waistcoat to the laundry by mistake. Soon after, the party begins to wind down. The night is late, and the main event is long over. You retrieve your coat and hat, join the queue of departing guests, and offer your sincerest thanks to Lord and Lady Harrington. He claps you on the shoulder, flushed with success. "A night to remember, eh?" he says. You murmur your agreement and step out of the bright, stuffy townhouse, back into the embrace of the cool, damp London night. The fog has begun to lift, and the air feels startlingly clean and fresh. In your pocket, the small square of linen feels like a secret, a tiny, stolen piece of eternity. You are back in the familiar quiet of your own study. The fire in the hearth has burned down to glowing embers, and the only sound is the distant, lonely chime of a church bell marking the late hour. The faint smell of coal smoke and fog from the street feels clean and normal after the perfumed, ancient air of Lord Harrington's drawing room. You take the small brown square of linen from your waistcoat pocket and place it on the polished wood of your desk, directly in the pool of light from your lamp. It lies there, a tiny, silent emissary from another world. It doesn't look particularly menacing. It mainly just looks like a very, very old and fragile piece of lint. Still, you decide it's probably best not to sleep with it under your pillow. Staring at the scrap, you can't shake a lingering sense of unease. The evening was a triumph of modern science and society, a confident peeling back of the layers of the past. But what if the past could push back? What if the ancient priests who sealed that tomb, with all their knowledge of magic and sacred rites, had anticipated such a violation? What if they had woven a final, unseen layer of protection around the body not of linen, but of something far more sinister? A curse, waiting patiently in the dark for millennia, to be unleashed not by the tomb robbers in the desert, but by the gloved hands of a society host in London. This is how the whispers start. The idea of a mummy's curse, a potent and enduring modern myth, finds its most fertile ground in the aftermath of spectacles just like the one you attended. These parties, by domesticating the desecration, by bringing the violated tomb into the drawing room, inadvertently brought the tomb's imagined guardian spirits along with it. Writers, sitting in their own quiet studies late at night, were captivated by the dramatic possibilities. The American author Louisa May Alcott, long before she wrote of the charming lives of little women, penned a pulp thriller called Lost in a Pyramid, or The Mummy's Curse. But it was another author, a man who worked as a theater manager here in London, who would truly give the monster its legs. Bram Stoker, a man with a deep interest in Egyptology and a friend to the curators at the British Museum, would later take the theme and write The Jewel of Seven Stars, a chilling novel about an ancient Egyptian queen's spirit reanimating her mummified body to seek revenge on the archaeologists who disturbed her. The shambling, vengeful mummy, a creature of supernatural power and ancient malice, was born as a literary figure, a close cousin to the vampire Stoker would later make immortal. Folklorists and cultural historians still debate the origins of this myth. Is the mummy's curse a genuine, if modern, piece of folklore that bubbled up from a collective unease? Or is it a purely literary invention, a bit of fake lore created by authors and journalists that the public then eagerly adopted as an ancient belief? Either way, the stories found an audience because they seemed to have a grain of truth. People connected with these events did sometimes suffer misfortune. An archaeologist would fall ill after an excavation. A collector who purchased a sarcophagus would suffer a financial ruin. A guest at an unwrapping party would develop a persistent, hacking cough. The real culprit, of course, was far more mundane and in its own way more terrifying than any phantom pharaoh. It turns out that the most horrifying ancient evil might just be a bad case of mold. Tombs, sealed for thousands of years, are perfect incubators for dormant fungi, bacteria, and other microbes. When a mummy was unwrapped in a crowded, stuffy London drawing room, these ancient spores, against which the modern European had no immunity, would be released into the air. The so-called curse of the pharaohs was often simply microbiology, exacting its revenge. It's far less dramatic than a shambling corpse, but infinitely more likely to get you. This notion would explode into a global phenomenon decades from now, in the 1920s, with the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. When the expedition's sponsor, Lord Carnarvon, died suddenly from an infected mosquito bite, the world's newspapers had their story. Never let the truth get in the way of a good curse, especially when you have papers to sell. But the seeds were planted now, in your time. They were planted tonight at Lord Harrington's party. The act of scientific entertainment had unintentionally unleashed a new monster, a powerful fiction that would haunt the popular imagination long after the last mummy unwrapping party had faded from memory. You might be wondering, as you sit there in the quiet of the night, your strange little linen souvenir resting on your desk, what became of this peculiar custom? If these parties were the absolute pinnacle of high society entertainment, a thrilling fusion of science, horror, and social climbing, why aren't they still happening? Why don't you get gilt-edged invitations for unrollings tucked in with your morning mail? Like all fads, from powdered wigs to frantic dancing crazes, this one, too, had its season. By the time your century, the 19th, drew to its close, the mummy unwrapping party had started to feel less like cutting-edge science and more like a ghoulish and slightly embarrassing relic of a bygone era. The reasons for its decline are threefold: a quiet revolution in science, sensibility, and sovereignty. The first and most important change came from within the world of Egyptology itself. The age of the swashbuckling adventurer excavator, the era of Belzoni and his battering rams, slowly gave way to the age of the professional scientist. The key figure in this transformation was a brilliant, if famously eccentric, Englishman named Sir Flinders Petrie. Often called the father of modern archaeology, Petrie was the polar opposite of a showman like Lord Harrington. He was a man who would live for months on end in a Spartan tent or an empty tomb, surviving on tinned biscuits and meticulously documenting everything he found. He would have been utterly horrified by the spectacle at Belgrave Square. he probably would have spent the entire evening attempting to catalog the sherry glasses and establish a chronology for the wallpaper. Petrie introduced revolutionary new methods. He insisted that the context of an artifact, its precise location, the soil layer it was in, the other objects it was found with, was just as important, if not more so, than the artifact itself. He developed a system of sequence dating, allowing him to date ancient, undecorated pottery based on its changing styles. He understood that history was a fragile story that had to be read carefully, not a treasure chest to be smashed open. His scientific, methodical approach became the new gold standard. Against this new benchmark, the Unwrapping party looked like what it was: a brutish and destructive act of vandalism. The scientific justification that Pettigrew and his imitators had relied upon simply crumbled away. Secondly, public taste began to change. The robust, often callous sensibilities of the mid-Victorian era softened into the more sentimental and nostalgic mood of the century's end. A greater emphasis was placed on a dignified respect for the dead, even the very ancient dead. The rise of great public museums also played a crucial role. Mummies were no longer just curiosities for a rich man's collection. They were important artifacts for the education and edification of the public. The proper place for a mummy was now seen to be behind glass in the hushed halls of the British Museum, to be observed with quiet reverence, not on a table surrounded by champagne-sipping party guests. It turned out that even the most jaded members of the aristocracy eventually decided that taking apart a human body as an after-dinner entertainment was perhaps a touch inelegant. Finally, the supply chain began to break down. As the 19th century wore on, Egypt, under its own leadership and with French administrative help, began to take control of its own cultural heritage. The Egyptian Antiquities Service was formed in 1858 with the express purpose of managing excavations and, most importantly, stopping the wholesale looting and export of the country's history. It became increasingly difficult and eventually illegal for a European lord to simply buy a sarcophagus from a dealer in Luxor and have it shipped home. The seemingly endless river of mummies flowing into London's ports slowed to a trickle and then stopped. Historians still debate which of these factors was the most significant nail in the coffin of the Unwrapping party. Was it the new scientific ethics pushed by men like Petrie? Or was it a broader, more gradual cultural shift in how society viewed the past and the sanctity of the human body? Whatever the primary cause, the result was the same. The fad faded into history, remembered as a bizarre and faintly embarrassing chapter in the story of Europe's obsession with Egypt. The parties were over. But the mummies, the silent guests of honor, were still here, resting in museums and collections all over the world. And that left future generations with a new question. What, then, is the proper way to talk to the dead? Let's leave the foggy streets of Victorian London behind. The image of Lord Harrington's party, with its glittering gaslights and ghoulish spectacle, begins to feel like a distant, slightly unsettling dream. The scrap of linen on your desk is a relic from that time, a symbol of its strange and destructive curiosity. Now, imagine that same mummy, the priest from Thebes, somehow surviving the night intact. Imagine it wasn't disassembled for sport, but instead bequeathed to a museum, where it rested for another century and a half. Today, it arrives not in a drawing room, but in the cool, quiet, climate-controlled laboratory of a major university. The desire to know what secrets lie within its wrappings is still there, burning just as brightly as it did in your host's eyes. But the shears, the probes, and the chisels are gone. The modern Egyptologist's toolkit looks less like a Victorian surgeon's kit and more like the IT department's server room. There's far more computing power involved than there are sharp objects. The first technological miracle to change the game was the X-ray, discovered right at the tail end of the Victorian era. For the first time, science could peek beneath the bandages without disturbing a single thread. But today, we have something far more powerful, the CT scanner. The mummy is carefully placed on a gurney and slid into the quiet, humming, donut-shaped ring of the machine. It takes thousands of individual, cross-sectional images, which a powerful computer then stitches together into a perfect, interactive, three-dimensional model. The mummy is, in essence, digitally unwrapped, and the level of detail is simply staggering. Lord Harrington could only offer educated guesses, but the CT scan provides data. The precise stage of bone fusion reveals the mummy's age at death, not to within 5 years, but often to within a few months. The computer model can be manipulated. Layers can be made transparent. You can peel back the skin digitally, then the muscle, and examine the skeleton for signs of disease. Modern science can tell you about a priest's painful dental abscesses, or the evidence of arthritis in his spine, a level of personal detail that makes the Victorian phrenological reading seem like pure fiction. It's the ultimate historical gossip. We can see hardened arteries, evidence of heart disease in the ancient elite. We can spot healed fractures from childhood accidents, or, in some famous cases like Tutankhamun's, evidence of a broken leg that may have contributed to his death. All those amulets that Harrington's guests passed around on a silver tray? A CT scan reveals every single one in its exact location and orientation, undisturbed. Scientists can create 3D prints of them, perfect replicas that can be displayed and handled without ever touching the original. The entire object remains intact, a time capsule preserved for future technologies we can't even imagine yet. The goal has shifted from spectacle to preservation. It's no longer about telling a good story. It's about gathering clear evidence. Using the skull data from the scan, forensic artists can even perform a facial reconstruction, building up the muscle, fat, and skin layer by layer until a face from 3,000 years ago is looking back at you from the screen. A real person, no longer a monster or a prop. The ethical debate has shifted too. The question today is no longer about the morality of unwrapping, but about the ethics of display itself. Should these ancient people, regardless of how long ago they lived, be exhibited as objects in museum cases? Curators, governments, and cultural representatives from Egypt and around the world are now actively grappling with this complex question of dignity and respect. Perhaps the most haunting example of modern technology's power comes from the mummy of a priest named Nesyamun. Recently, scientists CT scanned his throat and perfectly preserved vocal tract. They then used this data to 3D print an exact replica. By pumping air through it, they were able to reproduce the fundamental sound his voice would have made. It's a single, ghostly vowel sound, somewhere between an ah and an aa. He can't tell you any ancient secrets, but for a fleeting moment, a sound that hasn't been heard on this earth for 3 millennia was brought back to life. It's a quiet, scientific, and profoundly respectful way of listening to the past, a universe away from the noisy, destructive curiosity of a Victorian party. The clinical hum of the CT scanner fades, and the ghostly, 3D printed vowel sound dies away, leaving us back where we started, here, in the quiet of your own space, on the gentle shores of sleep. Your journey to the past is over. The glittering gaslit drawing room of Lord Harrington's London townhouse dissolves back into memory. The faces of the guests, a strange mixture of scientific curiosity and Gothic horror, fade into the shadows. All that remains is you, the soft darkness around you, and the imaginary echo of that strange and singular night. Think, one last time, of that small square of linen in your pocket, that tangible, pilfered piece of the past. It represents the very heart of the Victorian obsession, the desperate desire to not just know history, but to own it, to hold it, to conquer it, to cut it up into manageable pieces and distribute it as party favors. It was an age that consumed the world, and in its ravenous quest for knowledge and novelty, it consumed the past too. The Unwrapping party was the ultimate expression of this, a post-mortem on history itself, performed for a live audience. And yet, beneath the ghoulish spectacle and the scientific hubris, there lies a very human impulse, one that connects Lord Harrington's era to our own. It is the simple, profound desire to bridge the terrifyingly vast chasm of time, to look upon the face of someone who lived in a world of gods and chariots and to see not a monster or a specimen, but a person. Harrington, in his clumsy, destructive way, tried to do this with a fabricated story. The modern scientist, with their scans and data, does it with forensic evidence. Both are reaching across the millennia, trying to hear a whisper from the silence. The final, enduring debate is one of legacy. Can we admire the magnificent museum collections in London, Paris, and Turin, and the knowledge they contain, while simultaneously condemning the colonial and destructive methods used to acquire them? It's a paradox that lies at the heart of our greatest cultural institutions, a tension between the beauty of the objects and the darkness of their acquisition. The fad, for all its strangeness, was not just a fringe event. Even Queen Victoria herself was a patron of archaeological funds, fascinated by the dispatches from the field. The obsession went to the very top. The story of the mummy unwrapping party, then, is a story about how we see the past. Is it a treasure to be plundered, a puzzle to be solved, a monster to be feared, or a person to be respected? The answer, it seems, has changed over time. The gaslights of that strange London party have long been extinguished, replaced by the cool, steady glow of the laboratory screen. The frantic whispers of the crowd have been replaced by the quiet hum of a machine. The violence has been replaced by virtual reality. And now, even those sounds are beginning to fade. The story is told. The frantic energy of the party softens now into a deep and profound quiet, the kind of quiet that lives in ancient, sealed places. Let the noise and the bright lights of that Victorian world recede, leaving only a gentle, hazy fog in your mind, a soft blanket to comfort you. The morbid curiosity can rest, the scientific questions can be put aside, and the unsettling image of the unwrapped past can be allowed to drift away, back into the sands of time from which it came. There are no more startling discoveries to be made tonight. No more gasps from a crowd, only the steady and reassuring rhythm of your own breathing, a quiet and constant presence in the stillness of your room. Let the last thoughts of ancient Egypt and Victorian England dissolve into indistinct and gentle shapes, their edges softening as you drift further and further away into a place of peaceful, dreamless rest. The silence of the tomb has become the welcome silence of your own peaceful room, a hush that invites you to let go completely, to sink down into the comfortable darkness and to sleep.